The taper of my fingerboards on acoustic guitars is 11 millimeters from the nut to the 12th fret, which when I laid out the string spacing on my electric guitar drawing, it seemed like the strings were wider at the pickup than the magnet spacing was. So we needed to look into that.
Okay.
Because we want our strings to be above our magnets.
Right. So, here's the thing. We have to, is this where we have to decide?
Decide what?
What size of scale length we want? Does that affect
Yes,
the taper?
it does affect the taper.
Okay. So what do we have for scale length?
This should almost be a separate video, eh?
Almost should be.
Yeah. Probably.
So what scale length do you want? Okay, so I know I don't want this.
Why not?
Mandolin.
Oh, okay.
And I know I don't want this.
Why not?
I don't know what it is.
Anyways, yeah.
So we have 27 inch.
Yeah, so that's a really long scale length.
Oh, right.
We won't want that.
Okay. No 27 inch. What's your standard?
This is my standard here.
Which is a 25
and
3/8 approximately. We don't want that.
We're actually going shorter, right?
Yeah, anything longer than that, so...
This is pretty close. This one's longer.
Yeah, what is that? 65, and this one's 600.
Okay, why are you picking a shorter scale length?
Well, I don't know. Why would we go shorter?
The frets are closer together.
Yeah, that was not good.
The strings are looser.
Ooh.
Well, it
could be good. Yeah, it is easier to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have small hands. I want to make it a little bit easier, but I also like the bendability.
Yeah, I have heard that some guitar makers they'll actually plan out the scale length, or they'll measure out the scale length for a client based on how far they can reach from with their first and their fourth finger. Now I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense because they're so close together to the scale lengths.
Right.
So
like it's not
it doesn't
a huge
make
difference.
it doesn't make much difference.
That's,
honestly, I can't really feel the difference between this scale length and my regular scale length, which is, I mean, it's this is almost 63 centimeters. That's 64.5 centimeters.
Yeah.
So a pretty big difference,
right,
as far as scale lengths go.
Yeah.
But you can't really tell in the first. I mean,
yeah,
in relation to each other, the frets are very, very close to the same.
Right.
It's just if you're jumping like a long distance, then maybe it's different.
And it's a little looser string, though.
Looser strings,
so easier for bar chords.
Yeah.
But just in general. That also means it goes out of tune if you...
Yeah, and also you can't drive it quite as hard because the strings are... Yeah, they're strings are
they'll be...
Yeah.
But, yeah. So I'm thinking maybe in between here, somewhere like that. So 629 instead of 600.
This is the same.
All right.
But
instead of 640.
Yeah, this is the standard. But we're going shorter. This is very short.
Yeah, that's very short. That's
and this is what, and that's also.
So he took this, but because he wants more frets,
I added a few more to the new template.
A few more on there, and that's another story altogether.
Yeah. So basically, we're going with this template, 629 millimeters. But this means we can at least get the distance from the nut to the 12th fret so that we can work at measuring the taper. Every fretboard has taper, and that's fairly important because the strings vibrate bigger midway from the nut to the saddle. So you need that extra distance between the strings. So taper on an acoustic, I usually do an 11 millimeter taper. That's measured from, any taper is usually measured from the nut to the 12th fret. So 11 millimeters wider at the 12th fret than at the nut, in my case. And that's sort of the standard that I do. But recently with Eric in the shop, we had to think about it a little bit more because the rule of thumb generally is your spacing at the bridge pins or on the saddle, so the distance from the high E to the low E string should be the same distance or the same width as your fingerboard at the 12th fret. And it sounds like some builders use the 14th fret or 13th fret as this measurement, but basically the string spacing at the saddle should equal, in our case, the string spacing at the 12th fret. So with Eric's, it's 8.5 millimeters.
And how do you get 8.5? You go...
So the taper, of course, when you're cutting slots on the table saw, you want to make sure that your slots are perpendicular to the center line. You don't want them perpendicular to one of the edges of the fingerboard, otherwise all your frets will be slanted.
Right. Before you get there though, so how do you find that number?
The amount to taper the fence?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
No, before that, like, what do you call your taper? So, because it's 11,
yes,
that's because you're going from...
44.5 millimeters to 55.5 millimeters at
and
the 12th fret.
55 minus...
55.5 minus 44.5 is 11 millimeters.
Right. Whereas with my bridge, I had 53 centimeters.
53 millimeters and then
Millimeters, yeah.
minus 44.5. So yeah, this is where it gets tricky because standard, I do 11 millimeters taper. The difference, theoretically, your taper should be measured by saying, okay, I want my nut width to be blah blah blah, and then I want my bridge, my string spacing at the bridge to be blah blah blah. Okay, what's the difference between the nut width and that string spacing, which is also the width at the fingerboard?
Okay.
So theoretically, scale length will change that a very small amount. So if you were to draw it in CAD, let's say, then you can make it perfectly accurate.
Right.
By adapting it for your scale length, basically. Now that difference is going to be probably within the tenths of a millimeter, 1 or 2 tenths of a millimeter.
So we just go deduct the string spacing from the saddle.
Deduct the nut from the string spacing
Yeah.
at the saddle, yeah.
Okay.
And then, so when you're cutting table saw fret slots, you want to angle this side of the fingerboard has to be half of that taper of an angle, if that makes any sense. You want to angle
half
it.
that number that you found for the
Yeah,
taper.
so
yeah.
This fence, which I attach to my my regular fence, which is at 90 degrees, I add a shim of half of my taper over the distance of my 1st to 12th fret. So in my case, I want an 11 millimeter taper. That means I want a 5.5 millimeter shim on this end at the nut. Always put it at the nut. Don't do it the other way, otherwise you'll be making things worse. So you can see I've labeled this very clearly so that I put the nut end on the right side. 5.5 millimeters gives me an 11 millimeter taper. It centers, it makes the center line perpendicular to the fret slots.
Cool. And then, yeah, if you wanted 8.5, then you would just put a 4.25
millimeter.
Yeah, at the nut
So
distance.
I would like to have a fence that's adjustable eventually, but I haven't gotten that far yet.
And-
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.